What's up, guys? It's Doublezog. So in the last couple of videos, I've made some, maybe some inflammatory statements about how healers are pretty bad in general, and I don't think the community really understands healing that well, especially like in Classic and especially in the lower skill levels of the game. So I think I'm going to do a little series here. I'm going to start with just a little introduction here and a description of like what I think it means to actually be a good healer. And I'm just going to put my money where my mouth is a little bit here, and I'm going to try to do sort of like an intro to healing, go over like all the basic aspects that I think you need to be good at and need to be thinking about, try to give you some tips and some ways to improve and things to practice and stuff like that. I'm going to try to make this series a little bit general, try to have it apply to every version of the game. Although there is like pretty significant differences in terms of retail and classic, but I think most of these concepts are pretty transferable across all versions of WoW, even to other MMOs where there's healing. So what does it mean to be a good healer? What are the things that we're really going to have to be working on in this series? What are the things I'm going to be talking about? Well, I sort of structured this in this very sophisticated system that I didn't come up with in the last 20 minutes off the top of my head. The 5 levels of healing. Level 0, it basically just goes 1 through 5. There's a level 0, which is just sort of the very basic ground level things. These are the same for every role and every spec in the game. Level 0 is just don't stand in fire, do mechanics, be positioned correctly, and have uptime. Those 4 things you have to do no matter what you're playing in the game, and if you don't do these things, it doesn't matter how you heal because you're going to be dead. Yeah, so this level 0, these are, it's sort of hard to give advice about how to be good on these things. These are mostly just practice, like mechanical skill things, right? Like being able to pay attention to not stand in fire, knowing what mechanics are, knowing how to position your character. Uptime is a little bit different for healers than it is for the other specs, although it's quite similar to like caster DPS, right? You just want to minimize your movement so that you can spend the most time casting effective spells. So level 0, I just mentioned this because this is something that should be going on in the back of your mind all the time, no matter what. And you should be good enough at these things to just have them be automated in like second nature, so you don't have to actively think about them. And this is something that mostly just comes with time playing the game, although there is a little bit of like understanding that goes with this as well, right? But mostly just as you practice the other things, you'll just naturally get better at this. It's like learning to walk before you learn how to run. If you can't not stand in fire, doesn't matter how insane your understanding of healing is, you'll just be on the floor, so it won't matter. So we've talked about the basics. Let's actually go into the beginnings of being good at healing. So what's the first thing, the most basic thing that most healers are doing most of the time? It's level 1, which is reacting to damage. This level is just staring at your raid frames, waiting for somebody's health to drop so you can hit them with a heal like reactively, right? This is the most basic mechanical skill that healing requires, which is just the ability to look at your raid frames, see that somebody's taken damage, react quickly, and then be able to target them with a heal right away. Again, this is sort of like level 0, where you should be practicing this to the point where it's muscle memory, where you don't really have to be actively using your brain. This is very important, but it's also quite basic, and most healers just kind of stay between here and level 0. So even if you're really good at this, like, it's not actually going to help you that much to have a super quick reaction time, to have overall high HPS and high raid contribution, but it will help you with preventing people from dying. This is such a basic, like low-level mechanical type of skill. It's hard to give some tips here, but mostly what we're going to be talking about with level 1 is just like having your UI set up properly so that you can use a lot of your attention to be reacting quickly, and that once you do react quickly, you have the right keybinds and setup that you can quickly hit people with heals to prevent them from dying, and also just a little bit of understanding as well. So now that we've talked about level 1, again, pretty basic, let's talk about level 2. So once you get to level 2, you're already in the top like 30% of healers if you can do level 2 at all. And what level 2 is just choosing your globals wisely. So if you think about WoW, it's really actually not like an action game. It's sort of a turn-based RPG, right? Where it's like a JRPG, except instead of a turn, you have a global. And every 1.5 seconds, you want to choose the right spell on the right target. Just reacting quickly isn't enough, right? Just being really good at level 1 isn't enough. You also have to pick the right spell and the right targets. So being good at level 2 involves thinking ahead a few steps and being able to recognize instantly, i.e. like within 1 or 2 globals, which spell is the right one for whatever circumstance you're in. And you should be able to look at a raid frame and instantly tell which spell you should cast to do the highest HPS and prevent the most death. Being good at choosing your globals is as much a knowledge test as it is a skill test, right? You have to know your toolkit, you have to know the strengths and weaknesses of your spells, you have to be practiced enough in pressing them to choose the right one. You want to have this drilled in so well into your mind that it's becomes second nature and muscle memory. The more you can automate level 1 and level 2, where you're always reacting quickly and always choosing the right spell for the right circumstance, the more you can use your brain to think about other things, be that level 0 stuff like not standing in fire, looking at your feet, looking at mechanics, looking at timers, or whether it be higher level healing stuff. So again, level 1 and 2, these are the things that you really want to just be practicing all the time. And the good thing about level 1 and 2 is that you can practice them in any form of content where you're healing anything. So you can do it in 5-mans, 10-mans, PvP, arena BGs, etc. You can even do it while you're leveling in dungeons. Anywhere that you're healing other players and there's damage going out, you can always be practicing your reaction and your global selection. So that's level 1 and 2. These are sort of the simple, like, basic stuff, mostly mechanical skills. But if you master level 1 and 2 and you're not dying to, you're doing your basic stuff like your mechanics and positioning, you're already in like the 10th percentile of healers. Like, you're way up there. You're better than 90% of people if you're really good at these two things. So the next couple things are just going to be like the icing on the top of the cake, right? That last 10% that's really going to set you apart from other healers, as well as like allow you to do really effective things in your raid, carry your raid, stuff like that. So what's level 3? Level 3 is just having a plan. One of the most important things that sets good healers apart from bad ones is just having a plan for the fight. And what do I mean by this? Well, if somebody asks you, how are you going to heal X fight before the pull, and you don't have like a good detailed answer that involves like your mana, CD usage, spell selection, how you're going to respond to certain mechanics, etc., you aren't healing optimally. So an example of this, let's say somebody asked me, on my Disc Priest, how are you going to heal Sinestra? Well, I'm going to give them an answer that sounds something like this. I'm going to say, well, because phase 2 you get infinite mana, phase 1 I'm going to be spamming very aggressively. You can literally spend your whole mana bar, and you can even send low CD mana cooldowns in that time, so you can really blast. You can be pretty much by the time you get that transition phase. Then I'm going to be sending just maintenance heals into the neutral ad Kalen guy, just to prevent him from dying. After that, I'm going to have just a barely enough mana pool to get me into that buff without going full And then once that buff is out, I'm going to be spamming basically all POH or a power word shield during movement, because again, you have infinite mana and infinite haste. So you're going to cast your longest cast time, most effective heals. Spot healing a little bit on the Whelp tank, because he takes a lot of damage sometimes, and kind of spiky damage. I'm going to be saving my him and most of my cooldowns for after the haste buff falls off, but the boss still has that 40% damage. So that's like the kind of answer you should be able to give for basically every fight you go into. If you can't give an answer like that, you're not healing optimally. So how do you make a plan? Well, it means looking at the fight as a whole and matching up like damage instances, spiky stuff, mechanics, tank damage, etc. with spell selection, when you're going to use your CDs, your mana management, all that stuff. This is important because doing as much of your thinking before the fight as possible lets you use more of your brain for level 1 and 2 and level 0, while you're actually inside of the fight and like chaotic things are happening. You can always just fall back on that plan to do some of the larger, like bigger picture, more abstract thinking for you. What are some things that are helpful to master having a plan? Learning to read logs, copying players that are getting better results, managing your resources and cooldowns, knowing which part of the fight are better for which spells beforehand. So that's level 3, having a plan. Level 3 is super important. And again, if you can do all the way up to level 3, you're in the 95th percentile. You're better than almost every healer in the game at this point. What's level 4? Level 4 is playing well with others. So once you have your own play nailed down, you have your mechanics, you're choosing your spells correctly, you know your toolkit, you have a plan, now you have to learn how to play as a team with the other players in your raid. Again, once you can do that 1 through 3 stuff, you can start to incorporate the actions of the other players in your raid. If you're in a regular guild group or like a regular GDKP, or you're playing with the same players all the time, this becomes a lot easier because you can just sort of develop an intuition for how the other healers and tanks and all that are going to behave in your raid. You are going to develop a better feeling for coordinating your CDs with other healers, how tanks use their defensives, how much damage tanks take, if there's one tank in particular that needs a lot more healing, healing, if there's certain DPS players that are habitually standing in fire and take a lot more damage, players who are going to use their defenses, players who aren't going to use their defensives. You can get really, really granular with this kind of thing. The deeper you go, all it does is just make your spell selection better, your target selection better. It's reduce your overhealing and increase your overall HPS because you're going to be picking better targets based on like the actions of other players, and you're going to be using your CDs better. Another part of this is just learning to communicate. So learning to call things, learning to talk in Discord and use your microphone, learning to talk to your tanks, your other healers, even the simplest thing like saying that you're out with a mechanic and you can't heal, and, you know, telling your other healers to be careful on whatever target you were healing. Something as simple as that can save a pull, and if you regularly communicate succinctly important information like that, you're going to be super valuable. It's going to massively multiply like your usefulness in the raid, massively set you apart from other healers who do not communicate effectively. You can also go really deep with this one by tracking other healers healing on your raid frames. Things like tracking other Holy Paladins beacons, tracking where Earth Shield is, where like high impact hots are. You know, there's a lot of different things you can do here, but the deeper you go on this, you will become more efficient with your healing, but there's a little bit of a diminishing returns here where like the more information you track, the less brain power you can give to each individual thing, and you can kind of overwhelm yourself with information. So there's like an optimal balance point where you have enough information to play well, but not too much information that it's like overwhelming. We'll talk about that in this series about how to choose where that break point is effectively. So that's level 4. There's a lot of stuff to talk about here, but again, this is like a very marginal, like 5% type thing. If you master everything before this and you don't really bother with this too much, you'll still be a very good healer. So what's level 5? Level 5 is like the lowest impact thing, but I just thought I'd throw it in here because, you know, 5's a nice round number. Level 5 is just metagaming. After you've mastered like all the actual like skill and knowledge based stuff, you can then start to just follow like what are the really good guilds doing? Do they have some cheesy strategy they've figured out? Do they have some exploit they've figured out? You know, what are the best players of my spec doing? Have they figured out some way to cheese or some way to like some clever use of game mechanics that I can also take advantage of? It requires a lot of effort for a low gain, but it's, you know, if you really want to go the extra mile, you can comb through logs and stuff like that. And we'll talk about in the series how to read logs, and that it is a useful skill to develop. But again, this is a very small, like marginal benefit you gain from this. Mastering the basics and having a plan is enough to be like probably the best healer in your raid. Those are the important things that we'll be talking about first. So those are the 5 levels that if you master, you're now a good healer in my view, which is of course totally correct and beyond criticism. So if at any point during this video, when I was like describing a skill, you thought to yourself, I'm not that good at that, or I don't understand what he means by that, you probably have something to gain from watching this series, because I'm going to go through all of these and I'm going to just give like some tips about how to practice and how to be better at them. And even if you're not a healer player, it's useful to understand healing. Increase your understanding of the game and it'll allow you to play better around your healers and to understand like what causes your healers problems. As well as like if you're a raid leader or if you're at any position of leadership in a guild, this will help you talk to your healers about how to get better, which is I think very important. Something that people don't do enough is like actually just teach healers the basics. What am I going to do in my next video? I think my next video I'm going to talk about mana management. It's sort of a level 3 thing because having a plan means having a plan for your mana. But even though it's sort of a more abstract skill, I think it's very, very important to talk about first, because I think it's one of the biggest single things that can set you apart from other healers. Like even if you're not that quick to react, even if you don't have that good of a skill of reading raid frames, even if you aren't choosing your globals super well, and even if you don't really have too much of a plan outside of your mana usage, if you use all your mana super efficiently, you will be better than most healers out there, especially in Classic. It's super important in Classic. So I think that's the first video I'm going to do, just because I think it's going to be the most high impact. That's the introduction to the series here. I hope you enjoyed. I hope it's entertaining, if not informative. Yeah, thanks for watching.
Zug Zug.